The millionaire CEO never believed in fate, until two small boys with a rag and a coin changed everything in less than 60 seconds. Owen Blake had always prided himself on discipline, precision, and a tight morning schedule. As the CEO of a powerful investment firm, every minute of his day was calculated, and this morning was no exception. He had a high-stakes meeting in less than an hour, and his thoughts were already deep in the numbers, the pitch, the people he needed to convince. His sleek black SUV cut smoothly through the city traffic, and he barely registered the street around him until a sudden tapping on his window forced him to slow down. Two boys, maybe 6 years old, stood on the edge of the sidewalk holding a battered plastic bottle of water and a rag that had clearly seen better days. They were twins, identical in every way, same light brown hair, same striking blue eyes, same oversized t-shirts that hung off their small frames. One of them grinned and pointed at the headlights of Owen's car. "Mister, we can clean your lights real fast." "Just 50 cents, the boy said, his voice hopeful but not desperate. Owen's first instinct was to wave them off and keep going. He didn't stop for things like this. He didn't have time. But something, he couldn't say what, made him pause. He rolled down the window and looked at them more closely. Their faces were dirty, but their expressions were bright. There was something about their eyes that pulled at a thread deep inside him, a strange tug of familiarity he couldn't explain. Without thinking, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. "Here," he said, handing it to the boy nearest him. "Keep it. No need to clean anything." For a moment, they just stared at the bill like it might disappear. Then one of them whispered, "Thank you," with such genuine gratitude it made Owen feel oddly unsettled. He nodded, shifted the car back into drive, and pulled away. But as he drove toward the towering glass building that was his second home, his focus slipped. Numbers blurred. The pitch he had rehearsed all morning faded. All he could see were those two boys, standing on the corner with two thin arms and two familiar eyes, offering to work for scraps. He shook his head, trying to push the image away, but it clung to him like fog. The moment he stepped into the office, surrounded by polished floors, sharp suits, and coffee-fueled conversations, he knew he wasn't fully there. He went through the motions, greeted his assistant, answered questions, nodded at updates, but the thought kept circling. Who were those boys? Why had they looked so familiar? Why couldn't he stop thinking about them? By mid-afternoon, he gave in to the instinct he usually ignored. He left the office without explanation, got into his car, and drove straight back to the intersection. And when he arrived, the boys were still there, rags in hand, waiting for another car to stop. Something in his chest tightened, and he rolled down the window again. This time, he planned to ask them more than just what they were doing. Because some part of him already knew the answer would change everything. As Owen pulled up to the same corner, he noticed the boys hadn't moved much from the spot where he'd seen them earlier that morning. The sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the cracked sidewalk, but they were still there, still hopeful, still holding on to that rag and bottle as if it were their only tool for survival. He parked across the street and sat for a few moments, just watching them. They weren't approaching every car anymore. Instead, they had taken to sitting on the curb, their heads bowed slightly in what looked like exhaustion or maybe disappointment. Owen stepped out of his car and crossed the street slowly. He didn't want to startle them, but as soon as they saw him approaching, both boys jumped to their feet. The one who had spoken earlier gave a tentative smile. "Mister. You came back. You forgot something?" he asked, clutching the rag with both hands. Owen stopped a few feet away and looked down at them. Up close, the resemblance was even stronger than he remembered. Their faces were narrow but not sharp, cheeks slightly sunken from lack of proper meals, but their eyes, their bright, clear blue eyes, held something deep, something unshakably familiar. "No," Owen said quietly. "I didn't forget anything. I just wanted to ask you a question." The boys looked at each other, then back at him. "Okay, the second one said carefully. He had been quieter earlier, but now his gaze was bolder. Owen crouched down, suddenly aware of how tall he must look to them, how different his tailored clothes and watch seemed next to their worn-out sneakers and faded shirts. "Why are you out here doing this? Cleaning cars?" They hesitated. The first one glanced at his brother, then back at Owen. "Because we need money." "For what?" Owen asked, his voice gentle but firm. The boys exchanged another glance, and this time the second one answered. "Our mom is in the hospital. We want to help pay for her medicine." Owen felt something slam into him, guilt, shock, disbelief, maybe all of it at once. He looked at them again, really looked, and realized they were standing in front of him not just as kids trying to make a few dollars, but as sons trying to protect the only parent they had. "Where is your mom?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice even. The first boy pointed down the street. "She's at County General. We go there every night. She says not to worry, but we heard the nurse say it costs too much." Owen felt the weight of their words press against his chest like a stone. "What's her name?" They hesitated again, but this time they answered in unison. "Emily Raines." Everything stopped. Owen's heart missed a beat, then another. He stood up slowly, blinking as the name settled into his mind like a ghost returning home. Emily. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years, but it had once meant everything to him. She had vanished from his life without warning, taking with her the quiet kind of love that he had never found again. And now here he was, standing in front of two boys with her eyes, her face, and maybe, just maybe, his blood. He swallowed, then crouched again. "Can you take me to her?" The boys looked unsure for a moment, but then nodded. "We were going there soon anyway," the first one said. Owen walked with them, every step drawing him closer to a truth he had never imagined. The hospital came into view, gray and distant at first, then all too real. His pulse thundered in his ears as they walked through the sliding doors and into the sterile brightness of the lobby. As one of the boys led him to the third floor, Owen's chest tightened. His thoughts spun, but one remained painfully clear: if Emily was here, and these boys were hers, there was only one explanation. And he wasn't ready for it. But he needed to know. The walk down the hospital corridor felt longer than it was. Owen's shoes echoed softly on the polished linoleum, but it wasn't the sound that filled his head, it was his heartbeat, pounding hard and uneven, and the voices of the two boys walking ahead of him, whispering to each other like this was something they had done 100 times before. He studied their movements, the way they seemed to know exactly where to go, as if the hospital had become a second home. He hated that thought, hated the idea that children this young were so comfortable in a place like this. He also hated that he had never known they existed. When they reached room 317, one of the boys stopped and turned around. "She's in there," he said, and though his voice was calm, Owen could see the nervousness in the way his fingers tightened around the doorknob. The other boy didn't speak at all. He just looked at Owen with a steady expression, one that seemed far too serious for someone his age. Owen nodded and stepped forward slowly. Inside, the room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the faint hum of air conditioning. The woman in the hospital bed was turned slightly toward the window, her profile lit gently by the fading afternoon light. Even before she moved or opened her eyes, Owen knew it was her. Emily. Her hair was longer now, but he would have recognized her anywhere. The curve of her jaw, the shape of her hands resting weakly on the blanket, it all came rushing back like a wave crashing into his chest. He stood there for several seconds, unsure whether to speak or wait, and then her eyes opened. They took a moment to focus, then landed directly on him. At first, there was confusion, maybe even fear, but it melted quickly into something else. Her lips parted slightly, and a whisper escaped before she could stop it. "Owen." He took one slow step forward, his voice rough with disbelief. "It's me." She blinked several times, as if convincing herself she wasn't dreaming, then tried to sit up, wincing as she moved. He rushed forward instinctively, stopping just short of touching her. "Don't," he said. "It's okay. Just rest." Her eyes searched his face, scanning for answers. What are you doing here?" "I saw them," he said quietly, gesturing toward the hallway. "They were trying to wash car headlights. They said their mom was in the hospital." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again with a sigh that carried years of exhaustion. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." Owen stepped closer, now letting himself look at her properly. She was thinner than he remembered, pale and clearly weak, but still beautiful in that quiet, effortless way she had always been. "Are they mine?" he asked, his voice barely more than a breath. Emily didn't answer immediately. Her eyes welled with tears, and her chin trembled slightly. "Yes," she said finally, and that one word changed everything. "Their names are Caleb and Mason. They're 6. Owen felt like the floor had been pulled out from under him. 6 years. 6 birthdays. 6 whole years he had missed. He backed away slightly, struggling to take in the weight of what he had just heard. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was going to," she said quickly. "But then I saw how fast your life was moving. I didn't want to trap you or ruin what you had. I convinced myself it would be better if I raised them on my own." "That wasn't your choice to make," he said, harsher than he intended. Emily winced but nodded, accepting it. "I know. And I'm sorry. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I thought I was doing the right thing at the time." Owen turned away, walking slowly to the window and staring out at the city below. His mind was spinning, full of the sound of Caleb's laughter, the way Mason had looked at him without fear, the sudden realization that he had 2 sons who had grown up without him. After a long pause, he turned back toward her. "I want to be part of their lives," he said. "I don't know how or what that looks like yet, but I want to be there. I've already missed too much." Emily looked at him with a mix of hope and pain. "They're good boys. You'd be proud of them." "I already am," he whispered, and for the first time since stepping into that room, he smiled. It was faint, almost unsure, but it was real. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek and leaned back against the pillow. Outside the door, the boys waited, leaning against the wall, unaware that the man they had tried to help that morning had just discovered he was their father. And though none of them knew it yet, the day that began with dirty headlights had just turned into the beginning of a very different future. Owen didn't remember the drive home that night. His hands had gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were sore by the time he pulled into his driveway, but his mind was nowhere near his sleek house or the life he had built over the years. Every thought was with the 2 boys who had stood on a street corner offering to clean headlights, and the woman he had once loved, still loved in a quiet, unresolved way, lying weak and pale in a hospital bed. He had never been good with stillness, with sitting and thinking, but that night he didn't touch his phone or turn on the lights. He sat in the dark living room for hours, trying to process what it all meant. He was a father. Twice over. For 6 years, he had unknowingly missed everything: first steps, birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories, fears of the dark, their first words. And worse, they had needed help, and he hadn't been there. The next morning he showed up at the hospital just after sunrise, carrying a bag of things he thought might help: a few snacks, small toys, coloring books, and 2 sets of clean clothes he had guessed sizes for in a quiet aisle at the 24-hour store. The boys were asleep in 2 plastic chairs outside their mother's room, curled up together under one thin hospital blanket. He didn't want to wake them. He just sat across the hall, watching them breathe, trying to understand how he had missed the signs all this time. Eventually, a nurse came by and gently stirred the boys awake. They blinked sleepily and then lit up when they saw Owen. It surprised him, the way they smiled without hesitation, as if they had known him forever. "Hi," Mason said. "You came back." "I said I would," Owen replied, crouching down to their level and offering them the bags. "Got you some stuff." Thought maybe you could use something warm. Caleb took a peek and his eyes widened. You got us Spider-Man socks. Owen smiled. Lucky guess. The boys sat down on the floor right there in the hallway and started unpacking the bags with excitement. For a moment, they weren't two boys trying to carry the weight of a hospital bill. They were just kids. And Owen felt something shift inside him, something fundamental and irreversible. Later that day, when Emily was awake and stronger, Owen asked her about everything. Not just the past, but the present. How she had managed alone. Where she worked. What she needed. At first, she resisted, not out of pride, but out of fear that accepting his help now would only bring confusion to the boys' lives. They've lived this way for so long, she said softly. I don't want them to feel like something's wrong with how it's been. He nodded, understanding her concern, but he also knew that what had been normal for them didn't have to stay that way. What if I just started by showing up, he asked. Nothing more. Just showing up. Emily agreed, and so Owen began spending every free hour at the hospital or with the boys. He helped with their homework in the waiting room, brought them real meals instead of vending machine snacks, and started reading to them each night before they curled up on the makeshift mattress that the nurses helped lay out. Sometimes, the three of them would just sit in silence, drawing or playing quiet games on the hospital floor while Emily slept. The more time Owen spent with them, the more their personalities unfolded in front of him. Caleb was the talker, always full of questions and impossible facts about space and animals. Mason was the observer, quieter but no less sharp, and deeply thoughtful. They were curious and funny, sometimes stubborn, and entirely captivating. And the most stunning part was how easily they accepted him, how instinctively they folded him into their world, even before they fully knew who he was. One evening, after a long day of tests and hospital routines, Mason tugged at Owen's sleeve and asked, "Do you think my mom will get better now that you're here?" The question hit Owen straight in the chest, unexpected and heavy. He didn't lie. "I don't know," he said gently. "But I promise she's not alone anymore. And neither are you." Mason nodded and leaned against his side, quiet and trusting. That night, Owen stayed until they all fell asleep. And as he sat beside Emily's bed, listening to her steady breathing, he realized something else. He had thought success was power, control, and wealth. But in that quiet hospital room, with his sons asleep on the floor and Emily beside him, he finally understood what success really meant. It meant showing up, being present, and choosing love even after years of absence. And for the first time in a long time, Owen didn't feel lost. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The following week brought a quiet shift neither Owen nor Emily could ignore. The hospital days were long, filled with endless checkups, medication charts, and the soft beeping of machines, but something about Owen's constant presence had begun to reshape the rhythm of everything. The boys now asked when he would arrive, not if. They looked for him in the hallway before breakfast trays arrived and raced to him the moment they heard his voice. He became part of their routine so effortlessly, it almost felt like he had always been there. Emily noticed it most in the small things. Owen didn't just show up. He paid attention. He brought Caleb's favorite juice after overhearing him mention it once. He remembered that Mason liked his toast extra crispy and that both boys were terrified of elevators. And he didn't just care for them, he asked questions about Emily's health, took notes during doctor visits, and offered to cover expenses without turning it into charity. At first, she resisted, not out of pride, but out of fear that letting him do too much would blur the fragile lines between past and present. But then she saw how gentle he was with the boys, how patient, and how much they had already started to love him without understanding the full truth. One evening, just as the sun was dipping behind the city skyline, casting the hospital room in a soft amber glow, Emily found herself watching Owen as he read to the boys. They were curled up beside him, heads resting on his arms, eyes heavy but still fixed on the page. He was reading slowly, doing the voices, adding just enough drama to keep them laughing even through their yawns. When the story ended, he tucked the blanket around them and whispered something Emily couldn't hear. Then he turned to her, not realizing she had been watching so intently. He walked over quietly, pulling the chair beside her bed. "They're asleep," he said with a small smile. "Out before the dragon got to the second castle." She smiled too, then looked away, her fingers nervously adjusting the edge of her blanket. "They like you," she said. "A lot." Owen leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "I like them too. More than I thought I was even capable of." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I missed everything, Emily. Their first steps. Their first words. I didn't even know they existed. That's a weight I don't know how to carry yet." Emily swallowed hard. "I never meant to take that from you." "I know," he said softly. "I believe you. But they need to know now. They deserve to know who I am. From us, not just from what they'll figure out on their own." She hesitated, glancing toward the sleeping boys. "What if it confuses them? What if they don't want you in that way?" "Then I'll wait," he said. "But I won't lie to them. I won't pretend to be something else. And I won't leave." Emily looked back at him, her eyes filled with something that hovered between fear and hope. "Okay," she said. "We tell them tomorrow." That night, Owen couldn't sleep. He lay on the small couch in the corner of the room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. But when morning came, and the boys were awake and full of their usual energy, he realized there was no perfect moment for a truth like this. There was only honesty. So after breakfast, while they were sitting together coloring at the foot of Emily's bed, she cleared her throat and called them over. "Caleb, Mason," she said gently, "we need to talk to you about something important." They looked up, curious but calm, and climbed onto the bed beside her. She glanced at Owen, and he nodded. "You know how you don't have a dad," she began. The boys looked at each other and nodded. "Well," she continued slowly, "that's not exactly true." Mason tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Owen stepped closer, kneeling down so he could look them in the eyes. "It means that I'm your dad," he said quietly. "I didn't know until recently, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there before, but I am now. And I want to be, if you'll let me." For a moment, the boys were completely silent. Then Caleb blinked and asked, "You mean you're our real dad?" Owen nodded. "Yes." Mason looked at Emily, who gave a tiny nod through her tears. Then he turned back to Owen and said, "Can you still do the dragon voices?" Owen let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Absolutely," he said. And in that moment, nothing more needed to be said. The days that followed felt different. Not easier, not less complicated, but softer somehow. Something had shifted between all of them the moment the boys knew the truth, and though they didn't ask many questions, Owen could sense the way they watched him more closely now, the way they leaned into him when he arrived, the way their expressions changed when he said he'd come back tomorrow and actually did. He kept his word without fail, and to two boys who had lived with so much uncertainty, that alone was everything. Emily, meanwhile, was recovering slowly. The treatment had helped, and she was gaining strength day by day, but she tired easily, and her body still carried the fragility of someone who had been pushing too hard for too long. Owen noticed the way she hid her pain when the boys were in the room, the way she smiled even when her hands trembled or her back ached. He started doing more without asking, refilling her water before she could reach for it, coordinating with the nurses, bringing books and quiet music to help her rest. Emily didn't fight it anymore. She let him take care of things. She let herself lean a little, not just physically but emotionally, even if she wasn't sure what it meant. One night, after the boys had fallen asleep and the hospital wing had grown quiet, Owen found her sitting up in bed with the blanket draped across her lap, staring at the dark window. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a reading lamp, and the silence between them was comfortable in a way that didn't need to be filled. "You're good with them," she said quietly, her voice almost fragile. It surprises me. I don't know why. He sat down in the chair beside her and leaned back. It surprises me too, he admitted. I spent so long being afraid of everything I couldn't control. I thought having a family meant losing myself. I didn't know it would feel like finding something I didn't know was missing. She looked at him carefully, as if seeing him for the first time again. They've changed since you came. Lighter. Safer. Like the world got a little bigger for them. Owen rested his elbows on his knees and rubbed his palms together slowly. I don't deserve them. Or you. But I'm here. And I want to be more than someone who stops by. I want to build something with them. With you, if there's still space for that. Emily turned her gaze back to the window, quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw but honest. You hurt me when you disappeared from my life, even if you didn't know you had. I told myself I was okay, that I didn't need anyone. And then I broke, alone, with 2 little boys who depended on me. I've carried all of that for years. Owen didn't interrupt. He let her say it, every syllable of truth that she had held in her chest. She wasn't saying it to blame him. She was saying it to release it. I'm not asking you to fix the past, she added. But if you really want to be part of this, then be here for the hard parts. Be here when it's messy. Don't run when it's uncomfortable. He nodded, his voice low and steady. I won't run again. And she believed him. The next morning, Owen arrived early with breakfast for everyone. Real food, not hospital trays. The boys grinned from ear to ear when they saw pancakes stacked in a box and strawberries packed in small containers. Emily smiled too, and for the first time, it wasn't weighed down by worry. They all ate together in that tiny hospital room, legs crossed on the bed and floor, syrup dribbling onto napkins and laughter bouncing off the walls. A nurse passed by and paused in the doorway just long enough to smile before moving on. After breakfast, Mason crawled into Owen's lap and asked if they could go to a real park one day, not just walk in hospital corridors. Owen looked to Emily, who nodded slowly. Soon, she said. When I'm better. We'll wait, Caleb added, taking her hand. We're good at waiting. Owen pulled them both close. You won't have to anymore. In that moment, Emily looked at the 3 of them together and knew, despite everything, that her boys would be okay. And maybe, for the first time in years, so would she. When Emily was finally discharged from the hospital, the air outside felt brighter, almost too bright after so many weeks under fluorescent lights and whispered conversations. The boys were ecstatic, running ahead on the sidewalk, their small backpacks bouncing as they took turns holding their mother's hand. Owen followed close behind, carrying the larger bag with the hospital paperwork, prescriptions, and everything else that had quietly become part of their reality. They didn't go back to her old apartment, not right away. It was a cramped 3rd-floor walk-up with flickering hallway lights and stairs too steep for someone still healing. Instead, Owen brought them to his place, not as a grand gesture, but as a temporary bridge, just until she regained her strength, just until the boys could breathe in a space that didn't feel like survival. The boys adjusted faster than expected. They claimed the guest room within minutes, dragging their things across the carpet, arguing over who got which pillow, then falling asleep that night curled up in the same bed without complaint. Emily took the downstairs room, still moving carefully, her body not quite her own yet. Owen gave her space, never pushing, always asking first. He brought her tea in the mornings, gave her control over the little things, the curtains open or closed, the music on or off, where to place the plant she liked near the window. He never made her feel like a guest. She noticed. In the quiet moments between their new routines, something unspoken began to form again between them. It wasn't just about the past or the children. It was the way Owen looked at her when she laughed, like he hadn't heard that sound in years and couldn't quite believe it was back. It was the way Emily paused when she passed him in the kitchen, lingering for just a second longer than necessary. It was the comfort of silence that didn't demand explanation and the ease of slipping into old habits without realizing it. One evening, after the boys were asleep and the dishes were drying in the rack, Emily found herself standing at the edge of the living room, watching Owen fix the corner of a blanket they had left on the couch. He wasn't doing it for show. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was simply living inside the space he had built to include them. She stepped forward without really thinking. He turned just as she reached him. Neither of them said anything at first. Then she asked, softly, "Are you scared?" He met her gaze. Of what? Of all of this. Of what it means to try again. Owen smiled, but it wasn't the polished one she remembered from press events or old photographs. It was quieter. Real. "I'm terrified," he said. "But I'm more afraid of not trying at all." She nodded, then reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. They stood there for a long time, saying nothing more. Over the next few days, Owen started including the boys in more of his world. He brought them to the office one morning when he only had half a day of meetings. His team, used to his rigid efficiency, was stunned to see him walk in with two 6-year-olds in mismatched socks asking where the vending machine was. He introduced them like they belonged there, like he was proud, not embarrassed. And he was. When they drew rockets on the whiteboard in his private meeting room, he left the drawings there all week. At home, they made pancakes on Sunday mornings, burning the first few and laughing until flour coated the floor. Emily sat on the counter watching the chaos unfold and didn't once try to stop it. She looked healthier now, the color back in her face, her voice stronger, her movements less cautious. She still tired easily, but she no longer hid it. When she needed to rest, she let Owen take over, and he did, without question, without hesitation. One night, after the boys had gone to bed and the house had settled into a warm hush, Owen stepped out onto the porch and found Emily already sitting there wrapped in one of his sweaters. She looked at him with a question in her eyes but didn't speak. He sat beside her and handed her a cup of tea. They watched the stars for a while, breathing in sync. Then she said, "They're happy." He nodded. "So am I." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he didn't move. They stayed like that, quiet and still, as if afraid to wake the moment. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But it was theirs. And it was real. It started with a small box on the kitchen counter, sealed with colorful tape and a sticker that read, "Our Family Plan." Owen found it one morning while making coffee, and at first, he thought it was a joke. But when he opened it, inside were 6 hand-drawn pictures, each on a separate piece of paper. The first was of a house, simple, square, with a chimney and trees and 4 smiling stick figures out front. The second showed a dog they didn't have, with "Someday" written in crayon above it. The third was a giant pancake with blueberries, the boys' favorite. The fourth was a playground. The fifth was a rocket ship with all their names written along the side. And the last one was a heart, cracked down the middle, and then stitched back together. It was labeled "Healed." He stood there staring at the drawings, the weight of it slowly sinking in. He didn't need to ask who had made them. This was their way of telling him they were ready for more, that their little family, built out of coincidence and overdue truths, was ready for the next chapter. That weekend, they moved into a new house just outside the city, not too far from his office, but with enough space for a yard, a swing set, and sunlight in every room. It wasn't the mansion he had once thought he'd end up in. It was better. The walls were empty at first, but within days the boys had filled them with drawings, magnets, and paper cutouts. Emily claimed the kitchen like she'd been born in it, and soon the entire house smelled like cinnamon and clean linen. Owen built bookshelves, helped assemble furniture with Mason perched on the box reading instructions aloud, and Caleb pretending to be the supervisor. It was messy. It was loud. And it was everything he hadn't realized he wanted. They settled into a rhythm that made sense, even if it didn't follow any blueprint. Mornings were full of rushing and cereal spills and someone always forgetting their backpack. Evenings were slower, dinner around the table, stories under blankets, small hands reaching for reassurance. Emily kept healing, stronger with each passing day, her laughter more frequent, her eyes brighter. Owen still had work, meetings, responsibilities that pulled at him, but he never let them take precedence. His calendar had been rearranged, not just professionally, but emotionally. His sons came first. Emily came first. Everything else followed. One night, not long after they'd moved, Emily came downstairs after the boys had gone to bed and found Owen sitting on the floor in the living room surrounded by photo albums. He had ordered prints of all the pictures he'd taken since the hospital, first meals, the boys in the office, Emily smiling in the sun for the first time in months. She sat beside him without a word and flipped through the pages. There were gaps, of course. Years he hadn't been there for. But they were filling them in now. Together. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, simple, elegant, nothing flashy. A ring. Not because he wanted to claim her. But because he wanted to ask. Slowly, carefully, he took her hand. "I know we're already a family," he said quietly. "But if it's all right with you, I want to spend the rest of my life reminding you of that. Every day." Emily didn't cry. She smiled. A deep, certain kind of smile. "Yes," she whispered. "For all the days we missed. And all the ones ahead." When they told the boys the next morning, they both shouted the same thing in unison: "Does this mean we get cake?" Later that afternoon, they baked one together, lopsided, with too much frosting, but perfect in its own way. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. There would be arguments, scraped knees, spilled milk, missed calls. But there would also be birthdays, first days of school, sleepy hugs, pancakes on Saturdays, and 4 names on the mailbox. They had come together through the most unexpected path, with pain and distance and silence between them, but they had found their way back. Not to the life they had imagined, but to the life that had been waiting for them all along. And that made all the difference. The millionaire CEO was stuck in traffic, until he saw 2 little girls sleeping alone on an empty bus, and realized he couldn't just drive away. Oliver Harris had never been a man who tolerated delays. His days were managed with precision, his car routes optimized down to the minute, and his expectations rarely left room for the unpredictable. That morning began like any other, coffee in hand, briefcase by his side, and a quiet driver escorting him toward the downtown offices of Harris Group International. It was a crisp weekday, the kind that promised clarity and control, the kind Oliver liked best. He reviewed presentation notes from his tablet in the back seat of his black sedan, barely noticing the city streaming past the tinted windows. He had a meeting scheduled at exactly 9 a.m. with international investors and, as always, he planned to be 5 minutes early. But just 2 blocks from the final turn, the traffic halted completely. His driver leaned forward, murmuring something about a stalled bus. Oliver didn't respond right away. He didn't need to, his face had already tightened, his jaw clenched in quiet frustration. Minutes passed. The car didn't move. He checked his watch, then the screen again, and finally pushed the door open, stepping into the noise and confusion of a packed city street. Cars honked, pedestrians stood on the sidewalk with annoyed expressions, and in the distance, a city bus sat idling on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. Next to it stood the driver, alone, looking anxious and unsure. Oliver's shoes clicked against the pavement as he approached the man. "What's the problem?" he asked, his tone sharp but not aggressive. The driver recognized him instantly. Everyone in the city knew Oliver Harris, but seemed too flustered to care. "It's not mechanical," the driver explained quickly. "There are 2 little girls still inside. Twins, I think. They got on by mistake and then fell asleep. No one came for them. I don't know where they live, and they don't have any contact information. I called the office, but they said to wait for a response." Without thinking, Oliver turned and climbed onto the bus. It was empty, except for the two small figures curled up on the backbench seat. He stared for a long moment, unable to move. They were sleeping so peacefully, so completely unaware of the world's chaos around them. Their heads were tilted toward one another, their long, dark hair nearly identical, their backpacks tucked under their arms like pillows. Something about the sight shook him in a way he couldn't explain. These girls didn't look frightened or lost, they looked like they were waiting. And for reasons he couldn't define, he felt like they were waiting for him. He stepped closer. They were maybe 5, maybe 6. Both wore soft sweaters with faded stars printed on them, one pink, one blue. Their faces were serene, but as he stood there watching them, he felt his heart begin to pound in a slow, unfamiliar rhythm. He didn't believe in signs or fate. He believed in logic and data and decisions made with clear intention. But in that moment, every cell in his body told him this was not a coincidence. The driver had followed him inside. "Sir, I can call child services," he offered hesitantly. "Or maybe the school district, someone has to come for them." Oliver turned to him slowly. "No," he said. "Don't call anyone else yet. I'll handle it." The driver blinked. "You'll handle it?" "Yes," Oliver said, more firmly now. "They'll come with me." The driver didn't argue. There was something about Oliver's voice that made people listen. And without another word, Oliver reached down and gently touched the shoulder of the girl in pink. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and hazel brown, and stared up at him, confused but not afraid. The second girl stirred beside her, mirroring the movement with perfect synchronicity. They both sat up slowly, blinking in the sudden sunlight pouring through the bus windows. Oliver knelt down to their level. "Hi," he said gently, his voice softer than it had been in years. "I'm Oliver. Can you tell me your names?" The girls glanced at each other. One spoke first. "I'm Ella," she said. "And that's Emma." "Hi, Ella and Emma," he said with a faint smile. "Do you know where your mom is?" They both shook their heads. "She had to work," Ella murmured. "We got on the wrong bus. We were trying to go home, but we got sleepy." Oliver looked at them carefully. "Do you know your address?" Another headshake. "Do you have her phone number?" "I don't remember it," Emma said quietly. "Mom doesn't have a phone right now." Oliver straightened up slowly. His suit was wrinkled, his meeting long forgotten, and for the first time in years, he didn't care. He took out his phone, not to call the office, not to reschedule anything, but to make arrangements. Something about this had become his responsibility. Not because of guilt or image or headlines. But because in the middle of a traffic jam, two little girls had appeared like ghosts from a life he hadn't lived, and he couldn't let them go. Not now. Not ever. Oliver didn't return to the office that day. For the first time in over a decade, he let the rest of the world wait without explanation. Instead, he brought the girls to the quiet upper floor of his corporate building, a level typically reserved for private client meetings and executive retreats. It was peaceful, almost sterile, but he asked his assistant to bring in warm blankets, coloring books, and snacks, anything to make the room feel less like a conference suite and more like a place where two frightened children could feel safe. Ella and Emma followed him with surprising trust, their small hands in his, their wide eyes taking in everything without a word of protest. He could tell they were still unsure, maybe too exhausted to question why this man in a suit was helping them, but they didn't resist. And he didn't ask why they didn't. While they sat curled together on a couch with juice boxes and a plate of cookies in front of them, Oliver stepped out and closed the door behind him. His assistant, Rachel, stood waiting in the hallway, her tablet in hand and confusion all over her face. "Sir," she said carefully, "your 9 a.m., 11:30, and 1 o'clock have all been moved. But, do you want me to contact family services?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the door again, where faint giggles were now coming through the glass. No, he finally said. Not yet. First, I want to know who they are. Rachel hesitated. You think you know them? I think their mother might be someone I used to know, he said. And if I'm right, I might be their father. Rachel blinked, speechless for the first time in their working relationship. But instead of questioning him further, she nodded and immediately started making discreet calls, tracking school enrollment records, transit camera footage, anything that could help identify where the girls had come from and who was missing them. Oliver, meanwhile, returned to the room, where the girls had now begun drawing pictures on the whiteboard using dry erase markers. He sat down across from them and watched as they colored side by side, so perfectly in sync it was like watching a mirrored version of the same soul. Do you live far from here? He asked gently. Emma nodded. We live in the pink building with the flower shop. In the South District, Ella added helpfully. Our neighbor Mrs. King helps Mom sometimes. He took mental notes of every detail, filing it away with the precision of a man used to absorbing data. But this wasn't just about gathering facts. This was about understanding them, these girls, their lives, and the enormous possibility that they were his children. The thought scared him, not because he wasn't ready for the answer, but because of how deeply he already wanted it to be true. By noon, Rachel had located their school. It was a public elementary just outside the Southern District, a 20-minute ride from where the bus had stopped. She also found a name. Sarah Watson. Oliver hadn't heard that name in 6 years, but the moment he did, it felt like a key clicking into place. He remembered everything. Her laugh, her calm confidence, the way she had looked at him like he was more than just a title. He also remembered how he had let her go without much of a fight. She hadn't tried to follow him. She'd simply disappeared. And now, it seemed, she had done so with more than her pride. She'd done it with 2 lives he hadn't known existed. Back in the lounge, the girls were curled up under blankets, fast asleep again, their heads resting together. Oliver sat in the armchair across from them, watching the steady rhythm of their breathing. They looked peaceful now. Trusting. And he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to think before: if they were his, if this truly was his family, he didn't just want to help them. He wanted to be with them. He wanted to know their routines, their fears, their favorite bedtime stories. He wanted to be more than the man who found them. He wanted to be their father in every sense. And as he sat there, one hand on his knee, the other resting lightly on the back of the chair, he whispered to the empty air around him, I won't walk away this time. Whatever it takes. I'll be there. By early evening, Oliver was standing in front of a weathered apartment complex on the south side of the city, a quiet, modest building tucked between a corner laundromat and a closed florist shop. He held a crumpled slip of paper in one hand, the address Rachel had confirmed belonged to Sarah Watson, the mother of Ella and Emma. He hadn't said much on the drive over, and even now, standing at the base of the stairs, he wasn't sure what he was going to say once she opened the door. It had been 6 years since he had last seen her. Their relationship hadn't ended in anger or betrayal, but in distance and misaligned priorities. He had chosen his career. She had quietly accepted that choice and walked away. He climbed the stairs slowly, his shoes echoing on the concrete steps, and paused at apartment 3B. The hallway smelled faintly of cooking oil and detergent. He could hear a TV faintly in one unit and the sound of someone vacuuming in another. He knocked twice, steady and firm, and took a step back. Moments passed. He heard shuffling behind the door, then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened only partway at first, a cautious chain still drawn across the frame. Sarah peeked through the gap. She looked almost exactly as he remembered her, though there was something new in her eyes, something more guarded, more tired. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore a faded sweatshirt over scrubs, likely just home from work. The moment her eyes met his, she froze. "Oliver," she said, her voice low and uncertain. He nodded. "Hi, Sarah." She didn't open the door any wider at first. "What are you doing here?" "I found Ella and Emma this morning," he said quietly. "They were asleep on a city bus. I recognized something. I had to find you." The door closed gently. For a second he thought she had shut him out. But then he heard the chain slide, and the door opened fully. Sarah stepped aside, letting him in without a word. The apartment was small but clean, with toys tucked into corners and a calendar full of notes pinned beside the fridge. He noticed 2 small jackets on the hooks by the door, matching shoes lined up neatly underneath. It was a home built around love and routine, not luxury. She led him to the kitchen table and sat across from him. He didn't sit right away, unsure if he even deserved to. "They're safe," he began. "They stayed with me most of the day. I didn't know what else to do. They didn't know their address, and they said you didn't have a phone. I didn't want to call anyone who might separate them from you." Sarah nodded slowly, still processing everything. "They weren't supposed to get on the bus alone. I usually walk them. But today, I got called in early. My neighbor helped, but I guess something got mixed up." She ran a hand through her hair, visibly shaken. "I was going crazy looking for them." "I'm sorry," Oliver said, and he meant it, not just for today, but for the 6 years that had led to this moment. "I didn't know about them. About any of it." Sarah looked up at him, and her expression softened just a little. "I tried to tell you once. I even wrote a letter. But I never sent it. I figured it was better not to complicate things." His voice broke slightly. "You should have told me. I would have. You were building a company, Oliver. You barely had time for me, let alone children. I didn't want to become someone's burden or interruption. I thought I was doing the right thing." For a long moment, they both sat in silence. Then he asked, "Can I be in their lives now?" Sarah studied him, not with anger but with caution. "They don't know who you are. I never spoke badly about you, but I didn't tell them either. I wanted to protect them from expectations I couldn't promise. But they liked you, didn't they?" He nodded. "We spent the day drawing. They made me promise to come back." She gave a small smile. "They're good girls. They deserve someone who stays." "I'm ready to stay," he said, finally sitting down across from her. "For them. And if you'll let me, for you too." Sarah didn't respond right away. She looked at the clock, then toward the hallway where the girls would soon be coming home from her neighbors. When she looked back at him, her eyes were tired, but they weren't cold. "Let's start with tomorrow," she said. "You can pick them up from school." And in that quiet answer, Oliver felt something shift, like a door opening just enough to see the light on the other side. Oliver returned the next day just before the final school bell rang, waiting near the playground with a nervous energy he hadn't felt since his early 20s. He wore no suit today, just a soft button-down shirt and slacks, his sleeves rolled up and phone tucked deep in his pocket, untouched for hours. When the bell rang and a sea of children spilled out into the yard, it took him only seconds to find them. Ella and Emma came out hand in hand, their brown eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on him. The moment they saw him, they lit up with smiles that hit him straight in the chest. Emma ran first, arms stretched forward, with Ella only a second behind. He crouched and caught them both, one on each side, their small arms looping around his neck like they had done it 100 times before. "You came," they chimed together, giggling in stereo. He stood slowly, holding their hands as they walked down the sidewalk toward the bakery across the street. It was a place Sarah had mentioned in passing, a spot the girls loved but rarely visited. They chose 2 pastries each, their eyes wide as Oliver told them they could pick anything they wanted. Inside the booth by the window, he watched them eat and chatter and interrupt each other, telling stories about classmates and pets they wished they had. He asked questions and listened, not pretending to be interested, but fully, deeply immersed. It didn't feel foreign or forced. It felt natural. Later, when they walked back to the apartment, the girls took turns holding his hands, and once or twice, he caught them exchanging a look between each other as if trying to figure out something silently. When they reached their front door, Sarah was already home from work. She opened the door before they even knocked, as if she'd been listening for their footsteps. Her eyes met Oliver's for a brief second, checking, not for drama, but for any sign that something had gone wrong. What she found instead was two happy, wind-blown girls with chocolate on their cheeks and joy in their voices. They had dinner together for the first time that evening. Sarah insisted on keeping it simple, spaghetti and salad, but the table felt full in a way it never had before. Oliver helped set the plates while the girls argued over who would grate the cheese. When they sat down, conversation flowed easily. The girls shared stories from school, and Oliver answered their endless questions about what a CEO actually did, whether he ever got bored in meetings, and if he had a dog when he was little. Sarah watched them quietly at first, still guarded, but eventually relaxed into the rhythm of their new normal. After the girls had gone to bed, Oliver stayed behind, helping Sarah wash dishes in the tiny kitchen. There wasn't much to clean, but neither of them seemed eager to end the moment. The silence between them was different now, not stiff, but reflective. They didn't stop smiling once, Sarah said, drying a plate. They're already attached. I am too, he replied, almost in a whisper. I didn't think it would happen this fast. But it did. She looked at him, her brows softening. They've been missing something for a long time. I think they were ready to find it. I want to be here, he said. Not just for dinner or school pickups. I want to be a real part of this. Sarah didn't answer right away. She rinsed her hands and leaned back against the counter, thinking. I still don't know what this looks like, she said honestly. I've been doing it alone for so long. I'm scared to hope. I'm not here to replace anything, he said. I just want to be present. To build something that lasts. She nodded, slowly. Let's see where it goes. When he finally left that night, the hallway felt less narrow, the air less heavy. Something had shifted again, not a full transformation, but a foundation quietly being laid beneath their feet. And as he walked to his car, Oliver looked up at the night sky, no longer checking his calendar or inbox, but replaying laughter and messy spaghetti sauce smiles in his mind. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't counting hours. He was learning how to count moments. The following week unfolded with surprising ease, as though the missing puzzle pieces of Oliver's life had quietly fallen into place without asking for permission. He began waking up earlier, not to review financial forecasts or rehearse speeches for board meetings, but to make sure he arrived at the apartment just in time to walk Ella and Emma to school. The girls greeted him each morning with boundless enthusiasm, their backpacks swinging from their shoulders, talking over one another as they reported every dream, every misplaced crayon, every minor injustice of the first grade. Sarah had started leaving the door unlocked when she was getting ready, and on some mornings, he would find a third coffee cup already set out for him, even if no one said anything about it. These subtle signals meant more to him than any signed contract ever had. He learned that Emma hated broccoli, that Ella could never sleep unless her stuffed elephant was nearby, and that both of them had an irrational fear of pigeons but an uncanny talent for reciting lines from animated movies. They began to include him in their world instinctively, as if he had always been there, asking him for help with laces, insisting he be the judge in their dance competitions in the living room, or pulling him by the hand to look at drawings they had taped onto the refrigerator. With every moment spent in their orbit, Oliver's sense of self deepened, reshaped not by who he had been but by who he was becoming. The transition from outsider to essential happened quietly, without fanfare, and perhaps that was why it felt so real. One afternoon, as he picked them up from school, the teacher approached him gently, smiling. The girls talk about you all the time, she said. They say their daddy is a boss who wears nice shoes and makes pancakes. He smiled at the comment, surprised by how warm and grounded it made him feel. In a life previously defined by headlines and financial milestones, He had never thought a child's casual description could feel more validating than any professional title. That evening, after dinner, as they were all sitting together on the floor building a city out of wooden blocks, Ella suddenly looked up and asked, "Where were you before you found us?" The question was simple, but it landed with weight. Oliver paused, carefully putting down the piece in his hand. Sarah, sitting nearby with a book in her lap, looked up as well, her eyes watchful but calm. He looked at both girls and said, "I was looking for something. I just didn't know it was you." Emma tilted her head, confused. "But how could you look for something if you didn't know it existed?" "Because sometimes," he said, "your heart knows what your mind doesn't understand yet." Neither girl replied, but they seemed satisfied, returning to their construction. Sarah, however, continued watching him with an unreadable expression. After the girls went to bed, she lingered in the kitchen while he helped clean up, and when they found themselves alone, she finally asked, "Did you mean that? What you told them?" He met her gaze. "Every word. I didn't expect you to stay this long," she admitted. "I thought maybe it would fade, once the shock wore off." "I'm not here out of obligation," he said. "I'm here because I want to be. Because I can't imagine not being here now." They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking, until the quiet was broken by the hum of the dishwasher and the occasional sound of the girls whispering in their room. The stillness between them wasn't tense, it was full, charged with the understanding that things were changing, deepening, even if neither of them had yet spoken aloud what that might mean. That night, as he let himself out and the door clicked softly behind him, Oliver realized that this wasn't about mending a past mistake anymore. It was about building a present and a future where the foundation was made of time, trust, and presence. He had no script for this, no business plan or strategy. But for the first time in years, he didn't need one. All he had to do was keep showing up. And that, he now understood, was more than enough. On a rainy Thursday morning, Oliver arrived at the apartment to find the lights off and the door unanswered. At first, he thought he was simply early, but a bad feeling crept into his chest when he noticed the girls' lunchboxes still lined up on the counter through the window and Sarah's umbrella leaning by the door. He knocked again, this time harder, calling Sarah's name. No answer. His phone buzzed just as he was pulling it from his pocket. It was the building's doorman, who knew by now that Oliver came and went as if he lived there. "Mr. Harris, Miss Watson was taken to the hospital early this morning. One of the neighbors called an ambulance." Within minutes, Oliver was in his car, heart pounding as he raced across the city, windshield wipers thrashing against the downpour. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than he realized, and for the first time in years, he felt genuinely afraid, not in the way business deals could go wrong or stocks could plummet, but in the helpless, human way that someone he cared about might be hurt, and there was nothing he could do until he saw her. When he arrived at the hospital and reached the emergency department, he spotted a nurse behind the desk and blurted Sarah's name before the doors even closed behind him. They brought him to her room quickly. She was resting, her skin pale against the white sheets, a thin oxygen line at her nose. A nurse explained it had been a fainting spell, likely caused by exhaustion, low blood sugar, and stress. She hadn't eaten in over a day and had been pushing herself beyond her limits. As the nurse left, Oliver sat down beside her bed, unable to hide the tremble in his hands. He had known she worked long hours and rarely asked for help, but he hadn't realized how thinly stretched she had become. Watching her now, still and vulnerable, he felt a quiet fury rise, not at her, but at himself, for not seeing it sooner. Sarah stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. She looked disoriented at first, then focused on his face. "You're here," she said, voice hoarse. He nodded, leaning in. "Of course I am. You scared me." "I'm okay," she murmured, though her eyes looked too tired to convince anyone. "I just needed a break." "No," he said gently, "you need rest. And help. Real help. Not just dinners and pickups. You've been carrying this alone for too long." She didn't argue. She closed her eyes again, and he could tell it wasn't out of dismissal, but relief. He stayed with her for hours, speaking only when she wanted to, brushing her hair back when she couldn't get comfortable, holding her hand when she drifted in and out of sleep. During that time, he arranged everything else. The girls were picked up by a trusted assistant and brought to his apartment, where they would be safe and entertained. He called the school, explained enough without revealing too much, and made sure the fridge at Sarah's place was stocked by the evening. When she was discharged later that night, he refused to let her go back to her apartment alone. Instead, he brought her home with him, where the girls greeted her with cautious hugs and tearful smiles. Ella had drawn a picture of their family, which was now taped proudly to the fridge. Emma had made a "feel better" card with far too many glitter stickers. Sarah sat on the couch with them tucked under each arm, her head resting against Oliver's shoulder, and for the first time in days, she looked peaceful. Later, once the girls were asleep, Oliver brought her tea and sat beside her in the quiet living room. She looked around at the space, once sterile and silent, now scattered with toys and art and signs of life. "I didn't think I'd ever need someone again," she said softly. "I thought needing someone made me weak." He shook his head. "Needing someone doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. And it's okay to be tired." She looked at him, her eyes shining but not crying. "What if I forget how to not be alone?" "Then I'll remind you," he said. "As many times as it takes." That night, as she slept in the guest room while he stayed up in the kitchen organizing medication reminders and work schedules, Oliver realized just how much his life had changed. This wasn't charity or guilt or penance. This was commitment. This was choosing them, again and again, no matter what. And in that quiet, unremarkable moment, he knew that love wasn't something that happened all at once. It was something built day by day, with steady hands and open eyes, and the courage to keep showing up even when it was hard. The days following Sarah's hospital visit settled into a rhythm that felt new but strangely right, as if the missing pieces of their lives had quietly shifted into place. Sarah stayed at Oliver's apartment while she recovered, her presence softening the once sterile space that had been defined by sharp lines, polished surfaces, and silence. Now the dining table was cluttered with crayons and flashcards, the couch had throw blankets folded in haphazard corners, and tiny shoes were always somewhere near the door. Oliver, who once measured time by the pace of global markets, now marked his days by breakfast giggles, school drop-offs, and bedtime rituals filled with questions, storybooks, and warm goodnight hugs. He had made a choice, conscious and unwavering, not to go back to how things were before. He delegated more responsibilities at the company, turned down meetings he once would have flown across the world for, and started his mornings not with headlines, but with two girls who now considered him the center of their universe. Ella had begun calling him Dad without hesitation, her voice bright and confident. Emma was quieter about it, but one night as he tucked her in, she whispered, "I'm glad you found us," and it stayed with him longer than any boardroom praise ever had. Sarah, too, had begun to let go of the invisible armor she'd worn for so long. In quiet moments, she'd admit things she hadn't told anyone in years, how hard it had been to be alone in the early months after giving birth, how much guilt she carried for not telling Oliver, how many nights she had sat up watching the girls sleep, wondering if she'd made the right choices. Oliver never judged her. He listened, offered comfort when she needed it, and space when she didn't. They didn't define what was happening between them, but there was an undeniable closeness, a growing intimacy rooted not in old romance but in shared responsibility and trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and the city outside buzzed with distant sounds, they found themselves sitting on the balcony after the girls had gone to bed. Sarah wrapped in a blanket, Oliver with 2 mugs of tea. She looked over at him and said, not quite casually, "I don't know how to go back to the way things were. Even if I wanted to." He didn't respond right away. He watched the lights flicker in the distance and finally turned to her. "Maybe we're not supposed to go back. Maybe we just keep going forward." She nodded, then looked down at the mug in her hands. "Do you ever resent me for not telling you sooner?" He thought about it. He had asked himself that question 100 times in the past weeks. No, he said. I regret not being there. I regret all the moments I missed. But I don't resent you. You did what you thought was best. And maybe if you had told me back then, I wouldn't have been ready. Sarah's shoulders dropped slightly, as if something heavy had eased. They adore you, you know, she said with a soft smile. You're already their hero. I don't want to be a hero, he said. I just want to be theirs. Every day. No matter what. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of things neither of them needed to say aloud. There was still uncertainty between them, and grief over the years lost, but it no longer held them apart. It simply reminded them how much they had to protect now that they had found one another again. Later that night, as Oliver checked on the girls, finding them tangled in blankets and each other's arms, he stood quietly by the doorway, marveling at the improbable turns that had brought them here. For so long, he had believed love came with conditions, and that family was something defined by structure, not emotion. But now, in the quiet of this transformed apartment, he saw everything differently. Love was the willingness to stay, to change, to choose each other, even when it's hard, even when it's late. And in choosing them, he had finally come home. Months passed, and what once felt like disruption had now become a rhythm. The apartment that had started as a quiet refuge for recovery was now home. Not in a symbolic way, not in the temporary sense that comes with shared space, but in the rooted, lived-in way that builds slowly and honestly. The sharp edges of Oliver's life, the tight schedules, the cold routines, the endless pursuit of more, had softened, replaced by laughter spilling from the girls' room, art projects taped to the walls, and Saturday mornings spent curled up on the couch with pancakes and cartoons. His calendar no longer dictated his worth. His days were built around the people he had almost lost before ever knowing them. It was a Sunday afternoon in late spring, one of those golden, breeze-soft days when the world feels suspended in a moment of peace. Sarah had taken the girls to the park while Oliver prepped lunch at home. He had never learned to cook much beyond toast and espresso in his former life, but now he could make grilled cheese sandwiches that were uneven but beloved, fruit bowls with more color than symmetry, and a salad that Sarah pretended to like no matter how uneven the dressing. As he chopped quietly in the kitchen, he heard the front door open. A moment later, twin voices bounced through the hall. "We found the best tree," Ella called, dropping her shoes by the door. "It had a squirrel in it," Emma added, already pulling off her light jacket and rushing into the kitchen. Oliver turned and knelt, catching her mid-run. She hugged him hard, face pressed into his shoulder as if it had only been hours, not minutes, since they last saw each other. Ella appeared beside her, slipping into the hug too, and for a few seconds he held them both, their tiny arms looped around his neck, their sun-warmed hair brushing against his face. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching with a smile that was quieter but no less full of light. Later, after lunch, the girls settled into the living room with puzzles, and Oliver and Sarah sat on the balcony, 2 cups of tea between them, their knees nearly touching. They talked about school enrollment, summer plans, the idea of getting a dog, and then, without planning to, they fell into a deeper stillness. Sarah looked out across the skyline, then down at her cup, and finally said, "I don't think I ever thanked you. For staying. For all of it." Oliver reached over, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to thank me. This is where I was meant to be. I just didn't know it in time." She leaned her head against his shoulder, the motion natural now, easy. "I used to feel like I had to hold the world up alone. Now. I don't." He turned to kiss the top of her head, a gesture born not from impulse but from knowing. "We're holding it together now," he said. "All of us." As dusk crept in, they gathered the girls and went for a walk. The 4 of them moved through the neighborhood like a family that had always existed, even if it had taken time and unexpected detours to form. They stopped at the corner shop for ice cream, sat on a bench under the blooming trees, and listened to Emma try to invent a new language while Ella insisted she could speak squirrel. Sarah laughed so hard at one point she had to wipe tears from her eyes, and Oliver, watching them, hearing them, feeling every bit of it, realized this wasn't just happiness. It was something deeper. It was healing. That night, after bedtime stories and 3 rounds of kisses and water refills, he and Sarah stood in the hallway outside the girl's room. The lights were dim. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of a lullaby playing in the background. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever think about how easily we could have missed all of this?" He nodded, emotion tightening his chest. "Every day. But I think about it less now. Because we didn't." And with that, they turned out the lights, closed the door gently behind them, and walked back into the living room, their living room, ready for whatever came next. Not as people trying to fix what was broken, but as a family who had chosen to rebuild something stronger from the start. What makes the ending of this story resonate so deeply is its quiet truth: love and family aren't built in dramatic gestures, but in small, consistent choices, showing up, staying, listening, and choosing one another again and again. Oliver's transformation doesn't erase his past mistakes, but it proves that people can change when they are willing to be honest, present, and vulnerable. The beauty of this ending is that it doesn't pretend life is perfect. It's messy, unexpected, and full of uncertainty, but it shows how healing can begin the moment we stop running from connection and start building it, piece by piece. It's not just a story of redemption. It's a story of becoming, slowly, bravely, and together.